Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Drupal for Gov's June webinar. So today, our topic is setting up USWDS in Drupal 8. But before we begin, the presentation will be given by Brian Seek and Dustin Boeger from CivicActions. But before we begin, I have to cover some housekeeping. Most of you who are on this webinar know who we are. We are Drupal for Gov, a nonprofit open source community of advocates who are interested in making government more open source. So all things open source. So in addition to the webinar, which we hold on every third Thursday, next month it will be held on the fourth Thursday. So keep that in mind, but we will communicate that. So in addition to our webinars, we also have the yearly conference that's usually held at NIH, Drupal GovCon, and we are going virtual. And so our dates have been pushed out. It's now September 24th through the 25th. For those who are interested in DrupalCon, which has also gone virtual. It's now called Global DrupalCon. We usually sponsor the Gov Summit, and that will be held on the date of July 14th, and that will happen between 2 and 4 p.m. for those who are interested. If you need to contact us, our email address is drupalforgov@gmail.com, and we also are available and can be found on Slack and Twitter. If you miss this webinar, or you're just interested in looking at past webinars that we've held, we have a YouTube channel. These recordings can be also found at the Drupal Recording Initiative and Drupal's TV curated playlist. Again, just to put on your calendars, Drupal GovCon will be September 24th through the 25th, and that's virtual. You can always find information online on the website, drupalgovcon.org. And lastly, regarding Drupal GovCon, if any company, or if you know if your company is interested in sponsoring, please sign up for our newsletter, because that's the way that you'll be kept up to date with any sponsor related information. And session submission is still open, so please register and submit your sessions. You can do so until July 10th. And keep in mind that Global DrupalCon is online this year from July 14th to the 17th. And so that's also why we're moving our webinar for July to the 4th Thursday. And lastly, if you, we can begin the presentation, but if you have any comments, please add them to the chat, and I will moderate them at the end of the presentation. So I'm gonna hand this off to either Brian and Dustin. Hello, I see you're here. I see your name in the list.
Yes, we are. I am here, and Brian as well.
Welcome, welcome. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and you can take over.
We're gonna let Brian take over as he's gonna run the presentation.
Yes, and I'm gonna go mute.
I think you're gonna have to give me access to screen share though.
Okay. So, Brian. Okay, let's see if this works. Brian, right? I'm handing it over to you.
Yep.
Okay.
There we go. Looks good so far. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Today's talk is going to be looking at Drupal and USWDS. Topic is it's time to get things started. So why don't we get things started?
Do I see your screen? Does anybody see this?
Can you guys see that okay? I can see it fine on my end.
Okay. So,
you're up.
Okay, so it's just me.
Yeah,
okay, continue.
No worries, absolutely. So today we're going to look at a number of things. We're going to give you a quick introduction. We're going to then get into things with getting started. Then we're going to dig in a little bit further into colors, fonts, and other settings. Then we're going to dig even deeper. We'll look at custom styling components. Then finally, we'll take a look at the Drupal UI, show you what the interface will look like when you're using the theme and in the Drupal interface. And then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So you can, maybe if you don't mind, feel free to add the questions in the chat, but we're not going to probably have time to address them until we get into that. So looking at introductions, the cast and crew. So before we get started on the cast and crew, we're going to do a little disclaimer. This is going to be a little tongue-in-cheek. There are going to be some Muppets in here, so don't expect a little silliness, but it shouldn't derail things too much. Brian and I are not the experts in this space, but we're getting there. We've done one presentation previously about this, and we're kind of, this seems to be something that works for both of us to kind of in the community, so we're working towards that. There will be some code shown, so hopefully that won't be a problem for people, but if it is, yeah, feel free to take a nap, and we'll wake you up when it's back to the Drupal UI. As always, the USWDS site is a great resource. And every website is its own special instance, so your mileage may vary on this. So one thing I would like to do is maybe get a quick feedback. If people are willing to do it, if you could just in the chat window write, give us a little heads up as to whether you're a content creator, developer, or manager, and then afterwards we can kind of suss through that and see what the audience looks like as we move forward. Also, if you don't mind putting in your experience with USWDS, version 1, version 2, or none at all, that would be awesome. So, introductions. My name's Dustin Boeger. I'm a front-end web developer working with CivicActions. Currently, my I guess my work path is working with an integration of USWDS with Drupal 8 for a Department of Defense project. And I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Hello, I'm Brian. I also work at CivicActions and just recently implemented USWDS on a project for the Department of Education, which hasn't officially launched yet, but that should be launching pretty soon. And worked on a couple other projects using USWDS previous to that. And probably going to be working on something using it coming up real soon here as well.
All right, as you can all expect, Drupal is involved in this. Certainly, I would imagine that most of the group here knows about Drupal. But, it's a key component, so it's always important to call it out. The other key component is the USWDS. It's the design system made for the federal government to make it easier to build friendly, accessible websites with an easier lift. It helps kind of give you a jump start on a lot of the things that you need to do. Brian, you can go ahead and tell them about the repo.
Yep, I'll take it over from here. So for this project, we have a repository that you can fork on your own and go play with. It is set up with a local sandbox using Lando. So if you're familiar with Lando, that should be a quick start for you. It has a Lando YAML file in there that's kind of already set up and ready to go. It's using Yarn rather than NPM. So some of the things that we'll show on the slides will actually, the commands will be a little bit different. If you're using the sandbox, we'll cover that when we get to that. There's also a database in the repo that you can import to get just right up to date with where we're at the end of this demonstration. All right, so we're going to get started here, the infrastructure of getting everything just going, and we'll talk about the components with that. The first thing is the Drupal.org theme, and this is a base theme that focuses on refining Drupal's markup so that it'll work with the USWDS library, and it does that through a number of pre-processed functions and some templates and things like that. The theme home is there on the screen, /project/USWDS on D.O. It was created by Brock Fanning and is currently maintained by Iris Ibekwe and Jay Darnell here at CivicActions. Also, Dustin and I help out as much as we get a chance to as well. And we'd like for you to help out too. So if you're using this theme, if you see issues, we'd love for you to create an issue in the issue queue, and even better yet, add a patch. All right, so the next thing we're going to cover is setting up a gulp workflow. And we're going to be focusing on USWDS gulp for this. You can use any gulp workflow you like. You don't even have to use gulp. But this one kind of, it just works right out of the box. It's pretty easy to use. It's easy to modify, and it works pretty good in a Drupal sub theme. And that little blurb there from the USWDS gulp is that it's made for developers new to gulp or those who just want a simple setup to get started quickly. The repo contains files and instructions for installing gulp 4.0 in your project and initializing USWDS and compiling CSS from the source files. So that's what we're going to cover here. And I'll just show you that page real quick. This is the homepage for USWDS Gulp, the GitHub homepage for it. All of the things you might want to know about USWDS Gulp are covered here. There's not a whole lot to know, but it goes through everything. So we're going to go through that, but also this is a great resource to keep bookmarked if you are using this. All right, so the first step is to install USWDS Gulp into the root of our theme, and in this case, into the root of our sub-theme, a child theme. So from the README of that page I was just showing you, there's this huge bunch of stuff we're gonna plop into our terminal to install it. And then we're going to copy out its pre-built gulp file from its home and node modules into the root of our theme as well. And again, if you're running this in the sandbox, don't do npm install, do lando yarn add instead. So let's look at our demo real quick. So I have this my default theme here is new theme start. It's just a subtheme of USWDS. I pulled it out of the example folder inside of the theme when I installed it in my Drupal site. And this is what it looks like when you start it up. There's nothing there. It's kind of aggravating if you thought you were going to get a theme at this point. But not to worry, we will fix that here real quick. So let me go over to this code editor, and I'll put it in presentation mode so that it is easy for everybody to see. Give me one moment to do that. All right, there's nothing to see yet, but let's get some of this stuff back on the screen here. There we go. Okay, so I am going to input that long command that we were seeing on the page there to install USWDS Gulp. I am in the root of my new theme already. And let's navigate there over here. So what I did is I copied this out of themes contrib USWDS inside of examples, my sub theme, copied it out, and I renamed it to new theme. And here we are at the root of that, and there's nothing there. And I'm going to run this command with lando instead of npm, or with yarn instead of npm. This takes just a minute to run. This is probably the longest thing that we'll have to wait for during this demo. I left the node modules folder populated in this theme already so that this would run a little bit faster. So that's why this directory was already in place. But when you start up, you won't have a node modules directory there. And while we're waiting for that, I'll show you a couple things. This comes with a pre-built SAS file, which doesn't have much other than telling you, what you basically need to do to set up a compiling scheme there. We don't need that. I'm going to go ahead and delete it. For this demo, I don't need that in there. There's also a package.json file that comes with the theme. We will want that, but we don't need any of the things that are in it. And so when you get this file, see, it just updated because I just installed all of that stuff. But when you get this, you can go ahead and get rid of the scripts and dev dependencies that are there because we're going to build our own stuff. So I'm just going to do that. I don't remember which dev dependencies were there before, but it won't hurt anything. I'll just leave them in there. All right, so now USWDS Gulp is installed. It's updated this package.json file like I was just showing you, and it's installed a bunch of stuff inside of node modules, which we don't need to look at. But one thing we do need is the pre-built gulp file. So I'm gonna run this copy command here to copy it out of USWDS gulp right into our home directory, and there it is. Let's hit back over to the slides. Okay, so the next step is to set up this gulp work file. So we're gonna update that gulp file that I just copied over to fit our Drupal theme. And what this file does is it copies over the images, the JavaScript, and the fonts to an assets directory. And that assets is important because the theme is looking for the stuff to be in assets at the root of our theme, and that's just how the theme's set up. There's several templates that are pulling little images and things like that from assets, so we're going to keep it with that. And the other note here is we're going to keep our Sass and CSS to the root of the theme, and then we're going to run gulp init to make it all work. So here's a little screenshot of what we're about to go do. So let's see here. So when you first copy over this gulp file, you'll see it has these variables here that it wants you to set for your own path. So the first thing is the path to where your Sass is going to be compiled from. And this, we just want it to be the root of our theme. So from relative to this file, it's right here, the Sass folder. And then the next thing, we want the images to get copied from the USWDS project into a location, and that location here is going to be that assets folder. So I'm going to say assets/img. Same thing with fonts. Copy that over. And then same thing with JavaScript. And then the next step is where we want our CSS to be compiled to, and I just want that to be at the root of the theme here at .css. I'll do the same thing for this one. And there we go. That is everything we need to get going. Let's see what else is on the slide. Oh, last step here is to run gulp init. So once you have all of this stuff set, you can run, in my case, I'm gonna have to run lando yarn gulp init. And what this does is it looks at all of these settings that I've applied, and it's going to copy things out of the USWDS library that's inside of node modules into the root of my theme. All right, so that's done. And now we have an assets folder. And as you can see, there's fonts and images and some JavaScript in there. There is a CSS folder here with a compiled style sheet. And then inside of Sass, there's a bunch of stuff. And we'll get into that stuff here in just a minute. So there's a few things we do need to do with some of that stuff. We need to set up some of the USWDS settings to know that our images and fonts are inside of that assets directory. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new settings file for our settings. And then we'll take a look at those settings. So as you can see here, these Sass partials that got copied over, these are all the USWDS settings of different types here. And they have a lot of default values in them. I'm going to make my own here. I'm going to name it in the same naming convention here. So I can just call it USWDS theme custom.scss. Okay, so there we go. I have this blank file. So there's a couple of things that I want to change, and those are located, the first one is inside of general. So I'm going to take a look, and that is this theme image path. So it's looking, if it doesn't know about the assets folder, so we just need to change that. And instead of changing it in this file, I'm just going to copy this over into that custom file that I'm building here. And just so I know that these are general settings, I'll put that there. And then all I need to do is add assets. Oops. Like that. And I didn't spell that right. There we go. And then the next one is inside of the typography. So I'll go ahead and make a little comment there so I know where typography settings start. And it's a similar setting. It's the font path. So we have to tell it where our fonts are located at. So let's go up here and paste that in there. And all I need to do is add assets/fonts. There we go. And let's see what's next in the slides. So we've done those two things out of our settings files. Okay, so we need to update a few things, library references in our themes info file. The parent theme defines a library called USWDS, but it doesn't actually provide any of those files for that library. So we're going to override the library in the child theme and point things into the right direction. And so this screenshot shows you what we're about to go do, and it's just replacing the path to this CSS file with our own CSS. So this is what the parent theme said the CSS file was going to be at assets CSS USWDS.css. We don't want to do that because that is a precompiled USWDS with all the defaults, and that doesn't really help us. We want to integrate this with our custom setup here. So we're gonna have CSS going to our freshly compiled CSS, and then the JavaScript can just point to that assets folder because it's it doesn't really need to. We're not compiling any JavaScript. So let's take a look at what that looks like. I'm gonna pop open the info file here. And then we'll just change this. So this is going to go to that, and our CSS is called style.css. And I don't need to do anything else here because that's already correct. And I can save that. And let's see what's next. All right, so using USWDS gulp. Okay, so we're going to update the styles.sass partial to compile our new settings file and remove the others. We're going to compile that initial style sheet with gulp build sass. I'm going to show you how you can watch changes, and then we'll get into the next steps. So let's take a look here. So inside of sass, there is this styles.scss, and this is what comes from USWDS default. It imports each of the settings in this particular order. Components here, there's a note that says that needs to be last. And then there's some commented out stuff, and this is if you want to import individual pieces of USWDS, if you want to use it modularly, you can. But that's all commented out. And then this at import USWDS is importing all of USWDS. So I am going to actually comment all of this stuff out because I'm using my own settings file here. I'll do at import USWDS custom. There we go. And the reason why I'm doing this, and this is something that in a conversation in the USWDS Slack, even Dan Williams was saying was probably a good idea, is that I'm leaving all of these files, these default settings alone, and I'm just pulling out the settings that I'm changing. And this is an easier way to track what you're changing, what you've changed from the defaults. When you're making, if you make changes inside of these, not that one. Let's see. When you're making changes inside of these settings, it's hard to keep track of what you changed versus what was the default setting. And you don't actually have to import all these files because the defaults get imported inside of the USWDS library itself. So by making our own custom version of this, we can just have a really minimized file that shows us exactly what we're overwriting. So let's see what the next step here. All right, so we've made that change and we're ready to compile. So let's go over here and do, so I just want to reiterate here, we're importing our custom settings and then we're importing USWDS. And then the next thing is this custom styles. That's the last thing that gets imported. And that's one of these partials that gets sent over from USWDS library, but there's not actually anything in here. It's just an empty container for you to make your own stuff. So let's go ahead and run lando yarn gulp build sass. And so it builds everything with those just those two overrides. So we're still using the default USWDS. It gives us a notice that it finished building SAS. And if we take a look, let me clear Drush cache real quick. In theory, now our site should have the default USWDS styling. All right, so that's done. And I'm going to reload this page here. And it didn't work. What did I do wrong? Let's see. That's what I did. I called it style instead of styles. I'm going to go ahead and change that down here. There's also a path to the CK editor style sheet, and we'll put that to CSS styles too. All right, so let's clear Drush cache again. Wouldn't be a live demo without a simple mistake that throws everything to a halt. All right, so that's done. Now let's reload this. All right, so this this theme has some weird a weird block placed in there, but let's ignore that for right now and take a look down here. So now you can see that this does in fact have the default USWDS styling, and I'm showing a couple of or all the button component here with all of the states, so you can see where everything is interacting with that. So that's all you have to do to get up to default styling in your theme. But let's do a little bit more. Let's take a look at colors, fonts, and some other settings. So we'll add to the settings there. Okay, so we'll first talk about adjusting colors. This is probably the first thing that's gonna maybe be a stumbling block for you. In the USWDS color palette, it's a subset of color families and colors, each with a grade. The color grades are designed to help select accessible color pairings for acceptable contrast. So what that means is a difference in 40+ in grades results in a WCAG 2.0 AA large text contrast. 50+ results in the AA or AAA large text. 70+ gets you up to the AAA. And any color that it's a grade 50 results in a section 508 AA contrast against white or black. So that's grade 0 or grade 100. So any color that's grade 50 will have acceptable contrast as long as it's on a background of white or black, a pure white or black. All right, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna update some color settings into that settings file. And we'll use this tool. Well, this is a tool that I would recommend you use, because there's one thing that's kind of hard about the colors is they're all out there in the grades. And as you can see in the screenshot, how they're labeled, that number is the grade that they have. But there's no visual indicator to know what color is what. And that's a problem that we had when trying to match specific colors for different brands. So I built this quick and dirty little color picker tool. It's not the prettiest thing, but it works, and you're welcome to use it yourself. I provided a link to it, and there'll be a link at the end in our resources. But this is it. This is how it works. What you do is you enter in a color into this text input here, and let's see. Let's try to find a color here. And then you can use this. These are all the USWDS colors available. You can use this to try to match one. So you can start clicking around. That's not quite right. In this, once you click it, in this box, it'll show the color and the hex value there. That's pretty close. So this is yellow 20V, and you can see that this is the hex value for that. It's kind of a fun one, face 00. And that's pretty close. It's close enough. My eye can't tell the difference, and most monitors won't really either. So you can use this tool to build your colors, your color palette to match USWDS. In a recent version of USWDS, you can also set custom hex colors in your settings. But once you do that, you have no basis on grade anymore. So you have to really know what you're doing, or be checking for contrast manually, which you should be doing anyway. But let's take a look at what that looks like in settings here. What I'm going to do, I already have a theme that's part of the way there, so we don't have to build all this from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and set USWDS demo as the default. And if you're working in the repo, these two themes will be in there. The new theme start won't have anything done to it because you can use that to start from scratch, or you can take a look at the USWDS demo that has some things done to it. All right, so we switched over to that theme, and adjusting colors looks like this. I'm gonna minimize that and take a look at here in the demo. I have my own custom settings file here that has a lot more stuff than the last one we're looking at. But I want to look at is the color here, and so there's a bunch of color settings that you can set, and I've only set a few here. So I've set the primaries. I've changed them to this kind of gold family. Secondary, I've changed to a cyany blue family, and then I've changed the accent cool colors to this green color, and that's all I've changed. But if we open up the color settings file, you can see there's a lot more settings that you have ability to change here. There's base colors, there's primary colors, secondary, a couple of accent palettes, and then there's some state colors for errors and warnings and success info, disabled colors, and colors of your links and things like that. But for the purpose of this demo, we're only going to change a couple here. So I've made these changes, and I'm going to run another drush cache clear here. All right, now let's take a look at, we'll put this in another tab here. So now you can see the site is a lot different with just a couple of changes. So my colors, changing just those three color families you can see the effect here on the buttons compared to here. From this one to here, you can see that it's a stark change. It's not a fantastic color palette. It's just a couple that I just guessed at. But you can see that's the impact that you can make with colors right there. All right, let's talk about adjusting fonts next. USWDS comes packaged with Merriweather, Open Sans, Public Sans, Roboto Mono, and Source Sans Pro as non-system fonts. It also has a handful of system fonts built into the system. You can add custom fonts by adding the font files to that font assets directory that we were looking at earlier. And then we have to define that in our custom settings using the examples in the USWDS theme typography settings. What that looks like is this. There's several things we have to do. The first one is adding a token for our custom font. In my case, it's Nunito. The next thing that I did is I changed the system's sans serif font to be Nunito. That is the token here that I defined. I've also brought in a custom font stack because now the system doesn't know which font stack to use for my sans serif. And so this is the fallback stack. It goes Helvetica New, Helvetica Arial, and then just whatever sans serif the system can find. And then the next thing is the location of the font, and this is the directory that it's in. And these are some of the font weight values of which actual font file to use. I have a lot of these set to false because I'm only using this in a really particular way. If you were using this across the board, you might want to set more of these. You might want to set it some italics. Depends on what font files you have access to. Let's take a look at that. So here's that custom settings file again. I've already made these changes. So we'll scroll up to the top here. And this is the same thing that I just showed you. So after setting the font path, I've added all of this stuff that we were just looking at in the screenshot. And the reason why I know how to do that is if you look inside of the typography settings file, all of those things are listed in here. So if you take a look here, there's a lot of settings for typography. We don't have time to go into a lot of them, but you can see that the default setting for this shows an example of how to create a new token. And the default sets these font families. There's a monospace, a sans serif, and a serif. There's ability to add a condensed an icon and a language specific, but those are false by default. And so you can change what you want your serif font to be, your sans serif font or your monospace, or add any of these. And if you want to use one of the prepackaged ones that comes with USWDS, you just need to change the name. And here's all of the names that are available. So some of these are system fonts and some of these are not. Some of these fonts are actual font files that are included with the package. So if you wanted to change it to one of these, all you would have to do is copy and paste, put it in there, and then you're done. But if you want to use your own custom one, you're going to want to change that token and then add some more settings. Here's where it shows the custom font stacks. And they're all set to false right now. But since I was adding a custom sans font, I pulled this settings value out and put it into my custom file. And then if you scroll down here, you can see in the comments of how to add that font location with the directory and all of the font weights and styles here. If you take a look at assets fonts, you'll see here's the directory that I added is Nunito, and here are my fonts that I've added in there. I haven't tested this, but just to be sure, I've added all 3 types of fonts for each font file that I'm using. I'm only using bold and semi-bold on this. And so that is the basics of how to add a custom font. There's a lot more stuff to explore in here, and we'll talk about it a little bit more when we're looking at some of the components. Oh, and here we go. Speak of the devil, component settings. So there are a handful of component settings that you can alter. You just need to look through USWDS theme components, SAS settings, to find anything that you want to create a custom value for. For example, I don't want to have a border radius on my buttons, and there's a setting for that. I just simply need to add theme border button radius 0 to my custom settings file, and that will remove it without the need to write any custom SAS. I'm still just working in settings. And what that looks like, let's take a look at the components settings first here. So each component is listed out here with a comment above which component it is. And there's not a lot of things you can change for some of the components, but sometimes the thing you need to change is a setting. And I would stress to look for the setting first before you start writing custom code or custom SAS or CSS to override it. And looking at the button, there is a border button radius setting that's set to MD. And if you want to know what the value of MD is, you'd have to open up spacing here. This is another settings file. And you see this border radius section here. And MD is set to 0.5, and 0.5 is 4 pixels. It's a bit of a detective work sometimes to figure out where some of these settings are going, but they all link into each other. It's all settings based on roles and units, so that it's easier to set them. Once you're down at the level where you're going to be writing custom stuff, then all of this stuff is set up and you don't have to think about the stack anymore. But anyway, so I want to change that component value of the button radius. I don't want anything, I just want it to be 0. So in my custom folder or file here, let's see if I can find, that's at the bottom. Components are always last. So the other thing to note is when you're making your own custom settings file, you want to add the sections in the same order that they were imported in that original styles.scss, and components is always last. So I just added this theme border button radius. I set it to 0. And as you probably already saw when we were showing this earlier, these don't have any radiuses, and the defaults have this 4 pixels or whatever it was that we saw in the spacing settings. So that's an example of how to change a component there. And there's several things you can change across the board on components. All right, let's talk about custom styling. So what comes after settings? So after you've exhausted everything you can do in settings in your custom file, now it's time to start doing some custom styling. Because your design may need to then diverge from what USWDS is able to do in its settings. And there's no problem with that. We just need to compile our own custom SAS partials after USWDS so we can we can take advantage of the USWDS toolkit with its tokens and functions and things like that. And that allows us to use USWDS settings values in our own custom SaaS. So you have access to the values that you've defined through functions. So for colors, for example, you can see here background color. You can call that primary color that you set by using this color function and then ask for the primary color. And as long as you're compiling after USWDS, you have access to all of that. And I'll show you what that looks like here in practice. Oh, I went the wrong way. Sorry about that. There we go. So I just used this USWDS theme custom styles partial that came when I gulp and knitted. But in your case, if it's a big Drupal website, you might have, you know, your nested folder structure of components, or if you're using Pattern Lab, this is where you would then start importing Pattern Lab stuff into USWDS. But for this demo, it's just this one file and not another nested group of things to import. And you can see here, there's a couple things that I'm doing. I'm changing some things in the Gov banner because there was no setting for this. I wanted to change the button color to the secondary dark color because I didn't like the way that it clashed. It probably had poor contrast as well. So you can see I'm using the color function and just calling in secondary dark. And that is set in my own custom folder file here. Let's go look at that again. Secondary dark is cyan 30V. So I can use that straight in my custom styles there. I'm also doing some stuff to the buttons because the secondary button, I didn't want to have the white text on the background. So I changed it to this color of ink, which is one of the base colors, which is kind of a near black. But I didn't want that change to cascade down to the unstyled button. So here I am just setting that back to color primary. And let's take a look at that. So you can see here, this is that link that I changed. And it has this kind of more cyan-y color now instead of using this orange primary color, which would have looked kind of awkward up there. Another thing to note, you can see this little arrow caret. That's an icon. That's an SVG that's being pulled from the library. And these are pre-colored. So if I wanted this icon to be this color, I would have to make a new icon and throw it into my images folder and then write a little bit of custom Sass to then replace that icon. But you can see here, the secondary button is now using the ink color, which is that near black. It still goes to white on hover. And then the unstyled button uses the default. So that's just a quick little example of some custom code. It doesn't get too deep into things, but for the sake of this demo, that's about as far as we can get. All right, I'm gonna pass back to Dustin to talk about the UI.
Thanks, Ryan. So once you've got all these components built and you've got everything supported, you're gonna wanna look at how that shapes up in the Drupal theme itself. So let's go ahead and take a look. So you'll want to look at the theme setting page. So on the theme setting page, there are a number of things you can do. You can use the Drupal interface to manage the header settings, footer settings, logos, favicons, page element displays, edge-to-edge setting, and menu displays. To keep this brief, we just focused on headers and footers. So in looking at headers, we see that we have a number of options that kind of explore up. So if we can take a look at the actual theme page, go to the settings, and you'll see these are already expanded out. So coming down to the header settings, gives you the opportunity to choose the type and style of header. To also, if you wanted to, if you can click that to show them, Brian, it gives you the option of basic and extended. Extended simply being the opportunity to move that all the way across the side of the, from side to side in the nav menu. You also have the opportunity to use mega menus in the header, as well as display the official US banner at the top of the page. So if we go ahead and save, let's see, make that change to extended and save that. Excellent, thank you. And let's take a look at that. Now you can see that the extended navigation goes all the way across. The search has been moved up to the position above. And you can see also that the banner that Brian was talking about earlier, that's where that check mark would have given the exposure to that. All right, let's go back to the theme.
Just showing the difference between the
No worries,
those
that's
two.
perfect, thank you. All right, now let's look at footers. So in the footers, you have footer styles. You have 3 different styles that you can use, and then you can also add agency information in the bottom of that. So let's take a look at that in the actual interface, please. Okay, scroll down to footers. Now you see that because we've changed, if you click open the style, you can see that you have big, medium, and slim. So once you're in medium or big, it opens up the information that you need in the footer. And so what we've done is pre-populated this information in here. If we do a quick look, let's show the footer, Brian. Also scroll down. You can see that the medium gives you the navigation. It also gives you the seal as well as some icons there. If we go back into the UI, we can change that to big. And what that will do is it'll give you more of the information provided for the theme. And it will show at the footer. And you now have the list out of the sub-components from your navigation menus. All right, you can see that there. Excellent. All right, so you know, there's a lot of things that are going on, but in kind of the issue of time, I want to leave some time for questions. Comments, you know, is always appreciated, maybe not quite the way that Statler and Waldorf do it, but certainly want to open it up to the group to ask any questions. I did see a couple in the chat channel, so we'll address those first, and then if anybody has any additional questions, I think we can open that up. So in looking at the chat, let's see, the first question was the URL for the theme. We've provided that in the chat. It will also be provided at the end of the slide deck, so we will be making sure that that gets shared out. If we look further down, let's see, Brian, the question was, if they're writing Sass, are there any specific reasons to keep the CSS folder at the top level rather than inside the assets folder, since they're compiling into CSS, not editing the CSS files directly?
So, yeah, so it's just easier to keep things that you're compiling into the root of the theme, because you're going to want to commit assets to your repo probably, but you may not want to commit the CSS file to your repo, because if you have some sort of an automated deployment that compiles CSS on its own, that's a better way to go. We don't have a lot of merge conflicts with people always updating the CSS file. Since you're compiling Sass, it's easier just to keep those things kind of separated, where the assets are kind of these static things that you're taking out of the library, and you can also add to, like if you ever need to add additional images and things, it just makes it a little bit cleaner to keep it separated that way. Does that answer the question?
All right, looks like there was another question. Robert asked, do you need to remove the underscore and the extension from the setting line? I'm not sure I understand the question. Maybe we can get Robert to clarify.
Let's see, so underscore, are you talking about this? If it's that, this is underscore denotes that as a Sass partial. That's just Sass stuff. I would leave the underscores because they're files that are going to be compiled into each other. I don't remember the exact reasoning for the Sass partial underscore thing, but that's just the syntax for a partial file. It's not a complete Sass file. It means there's stuff that's being imported all around it. Where styles doesn't have an underscore because it's not a partial. This is the file this is the only file that Gulp's looking at when it imports. It looks at this file and it imports the one custom file here. That's why that underscore is there, but you don't see it here. That's just a feature of how Gulp SAS works. And then it imports USWDS, and then whatever series of imports or single, if you're using like SAS globbing, you could import a single directory or something like that. But that's kind of just the syntax.
Okay, cool. I think that answers it. Another question was, do we have a Docker image of Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 with the base WDS theme already installed? I don't think that the Drupal USWDS base is a different theme from the one that we're using, so I don't know that that is really kind of appropriate to this conversation. Certainly you could reach out to the maintainer of that theme to find out.
I also don't think there's a Docker, a pre-built like Docker image for this either, because internally at CivicActions we use a lot of different containers in Docker that might not be the same thing that other people would use. That'd be an interesting thing to put together though, like as a thing for Lando that you could do.
All right, excellent. Next question. Is the component HTML independent from the Twig theme? If USWDS changes the HTML in the component, does the Twig need to be updated?
Yes, the Twig does need to be updated. So that's one of the biggest things that I think is left on this theme of things that need to get done is updates of the HTML. USWDS doesn't, the library is just a SAS and JavaScript library basically with guidelines for how to structure your markup. And so as that stuff changes, you do need to make sure it changes. And ideally the way to do that would be to create an issue on the theme stating that, you know, the markup is incorrect for whatever component it is, and then hopefully providing a patch that someone could review and get merged in real quick. That would be the way to handle it. And if you make a patch, you can always patch your own. So if you write a patch and put it up there, you don't have to wait for it to get merged. You can add the patch in your composer file and then carry on with your development with the correct syntax. That's our usual workflow for that.
All right, next question. This project is not covered by security community and not compatible to D9. Why are you not using USWDS base, which is D9 ready? I think there's probably a couple of aspects to that. First would be that there is a different philosophy in the approach to the theme itself. Second, developer hours, you know, time to actually put towards it. You know, this is a community effort. We certainly would, you know, welcome any support that anyone in the community wants to help in moving us in that direction. Certainly being compatible with D9 and making sure we're covered by the security community are on our roadmap. It's just a matter of getting the resources available to move that in that direction. Anything you'd like to add to that, Brian?
Yeah, it'd be cool if maybe like at Drupal GovCon there was like a sprint session to try to get the theme
Definitely.
into a good spot. One of the differences is, and I haven't tested this because I haven't used the base theme before, is ours is based on a core theme called Classy, and the base theme is not based on any theme at all, which is a good way to go if you want to control a lot of things. But if you want to use a lot of the Drupal-y stuff and contrib modules and core features like layout builder and things like that, it may or may not work because it may not be printing the right wrapper divs, and it may not have the correct classing structure to get some of those front-end Drupal tools to work correctly. Like if you have contextual editing on a view, or like I said, layout builder is very front-end heavy and Drupal's very clumsy in the front end. And so with using Classy, we're sure that we're at least caught up to whatever Drupal's going to provide because that's a core theme. And I may be speaking out of turn. It may work fine in the base theme, but at least there's some reassurances that since we're importing Classy on top of this, that a lot of those little features will work.
All right, cool, thanks, Brian. Is the roadmap for this theme available to look at? Not currently. We're still trying to get that finalized, but we can certainly share that once that's available. What we'll probably do is make sure that's in the README for the theme. Wouldn't you think, Brian, if we do that, get that exposed to the group?
I don't know. That's probably a question internally that some of the maintainers could think about. I don't know if there's a huge roadmap other than kind of just perfecting what it already does. It's more of an integration. So there's a lot of USWDS components that you would then need to build your own tools for. Like if you're using paragraphs, there's a USWDS paragraphs module that tries to incorporate some of those components in it. And I think that's where a lot of that extended building would happen, is out in those spaces. The theme as it is probably not going to do much more than what it's doing now. It just needs to correctly do some of the things that it's supposed to be doing, like some of the templates need to be making sure they're using the latest markup and stuff like that. So I think as far as a roadmap would just be getting it to a stable place of what it's doing. But I can't think of many other features that we'd put into the base or into the theme as it is for starting out.
All right. Another question was, I'm using D8.9.1. Can I install this theme and will they work together?
Maybe you can try it. There's not a lot of deprecated code in there that I know. There may be little bits, but for the most part, D9 is an upgrade from D8, but not like a huge structural update. So I would try it. If you're using Drupal 9, you could try it and it'll probably just work. There may be little tweaks and things that would need to get patched, but they need to get patched for the 8 version anyway.
All right, that looks like the end of the questions in the chat. So thank you everyone for joining us on this, and we'll hand it back.
Thank you, Dustin and Brian. So after this webinar, there will be a survey. Please fill that out and send it back. Fill out the form, sorry, so that we can continue to improve our monthly webinars. Is that a new question at the bottom? This might be a little complicated to answer. Did you see that?
It does look like it's a new question. So it might be a little complicated to answer, but I built a Drupal site and want to add styles into a class field Drupal. I think it was in a view. The settings are somewhere. I wanted to set table :grid -call -4. I would say that we tried to stay away from the grid system on this, just because it can get pretty complicated. Brian, do you want to speak to that?
If you're using a utility class like one of those things, it should work. If you're importing the USWDS library and everything's working, you have access to use all of those classes. Like any of those layout grid utility classes for USWDS will work as long as they have the correct markup around them. So usually what I do is I look at on the USWDS site. So like on this site, I'll find the component that I'm trying to match. Like let's say you said something about the grid. So let's say it was something like this. I would look at the code that it says that you need to create this sort of thing, and then look at the inspector in Firefox or Chrome on what is being rendered on my Drupal site and see where this stuff is missing. That lets you know where you need to inject your classes and things. And if you're using views, it could get a little difficult because views is a thing that adds a bunch of divs and stuff, and you can configure all that. It's just a thing that you have to do to configure it. If you're not using views, if you're using like a custom block plugin or something like that, it's a little bit easier. Or if it's existing Drupal stuff, you can, pre-process some things to add classes. But it's kind of just figuring out where you're deficient on your helper classes. So if you want to use this stuff, you have to make sure you're inside of a row and inside of a container first.
Awesome. Okay, and last question before we get out of here. The best place to ask these questions is probably in the USWDS Slack channel. Both Brian and I are in there, and a number of people there can provide answers for questions. If you're not in that Slack channel, definitely you'll need to apply to get in there. But once you're in there, that's the best place to ask those questions. All right, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you. This is a popular topic, and you mentioned contributing, using this as one of the contrib days. So hopefully I can reach back out to you two and you can help with that effort during GovCon.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for attending. See you next month.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.